Good morning, everybody. I'm Dominique Dervelle. I'm the director of the IMF's Institute for Capacity Development, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this high-level capacity development talk on building resilience for today and tomorrow. It's really gratifying to resume these talks in person. Thank you very much for all of you here today in this beautiful atrium. And at the same time, it's great to keep far and wide connection. So thank you as well for all of you joining for the live stream. This high-level talks kicks off a series of events that will showcase how technical assistance and training have helped and are continue to help build capacity for challenging times. We will host 4 other talks today and tomorrow on data transparency, financial sector resilience, strengthening domestic revenue base through customs modernization, and the role of fiscal institutions in promoting good governance. And we hope to see you there as well. And also encourage you as well to visit the capacity development experience space, which is right behind you, and we will show the variety of capacity development activities that we have. Coming back to this event, let me now turn to our distinguished panelists. We are joined by 2 leading figures in the policymaking and state capacity building area. Starting from my far left, Governor John Wangwangwa, who has been governor of the National Bank of Rwanda since 2013, was previously Minister of Finance and Economic Planning, and before that had a prominent career as a senior civil servant. Then Governor Timothy Antoine, who has been the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank since 2017, and previously had a distinguished career with the government of Grenada, including more than a decade as the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance. Governor Antoine is also the chairman of the IMF Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center in Barbados. Governors, thank you very much for being here. We are also joined by the IMF First Deputy Managing Director, Geeta Gopinath. Among our many responsibilities, Geeta Gopinath oversees IMF's surveillance and capacity development activity. She previously was the IMF Chief Economist, and before that, she was a renowned professor at Harvard University. Geeta, thank you as well for being here with us. I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to acknowledge and thank our global network of partners for their crucial support for capacity development. Without them, we would not be able to meet the rising demand from CD recipient countries, half of which are low-income countries. Let me also thank all of the experts who participate in this effort globally and recognize our growing community of over 150,000 online learners. We'll kick off this discussion with a few questions and exchange among our panelists. We will then take questions for the audience, so please get ready for that, and I'll give you a clue later on. Let me then start, and if I can start with you, Geeta. As highlighted in the World Economic Outlook issued yesterday, we face challenging global economic conditions and outlook. In that context, how can the IMF capacity development support our member countries in their efforts to address both the ongoing multiple shocks while also supporting long-term transformational reforms?
Thank you, Dominique. It's a real honor to join both of you governors on the panel, Governor Rohan Gombua and Governor Antoine. It's really a pleasure to join you both. And we know that both of you are very serious champions of capacity development, so I couldn't think of 2 better people to have on this panel. To your question, Dominique, it's challenging might be actually a bit of an understatement to the outlook. It is. We've been saying it's a challenging outlook for a few years now, and it was very challenging in the peak of the pandemic. But with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and what we're seeing around the world right now in terms of countries having to grapple with inflation at levels they haven't seen before, while at the same time their debt levels are going up, there's a cost of living crisis in their countries, and they have to make very big decisions about how to appropriately use their different policy instruments, monetary policy, fiscal policy, financial stability. And so in this case, I think there's one thing that's a constant and that we've always known is having good state institutions, strong institutions, having well-trained staff in those institutions that have the capacity to provide the right kind of policy advice. That is absolutely critical to navigating any time, but particularly this time. And I think it is very stark when you look at developments around the world because of how fragile the world is. Missteps on monetary or fiscal policy can have an amplifying effect. So capacity development is absolutely critical. We do this for meeting the long-term needs of countries, but also the short-term needs. So for instance, in the middle of the pandemic, when there was the question of how to provide transfers to people when you don't want to have a personal contact, they came up with advice and training about how to do that using digital methods. But more generally, we provide capacity development for how to increase tax revenues, how to manage your expenditures on the financial stability ground. So those are some of the more traditional areas that we're in, but we also have it expanded into, I guess I would say, somewhat less traditional, but absolutely now core to the work of the fund, which is on issues of inequality, climate change, digitalization. All of this is absolutely critical for the new world that we live in, and we're involved there. And lastly, I'll just make one last point, which is that we do all of this not just sitting here in Washington, D.C., but we have our regional centers, regional capacity development centers in different parts of the world. We have our long-term experts that are also located in the countries so that you get the ground realities. You know exactly what the demands are for the country in terms of capacity development. This is all demand-driven, so this is not about us telling countries what they should do, but it's completely demand-driven in terms of how we give capacity development. And we have, in terms of examples in Africa, we have the AfriTech East and we have CARTEC, and both of those are capacity development centers that are doing a lot of very good work.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Gita. And indeed, turning to our practitioners, and then turning first to Rwanda, Governor John Van Bongwa. Rwanda has a very successful track record in building macroeconomic capacity, including when it comes to monetary policy transformation and financing its development goals through domestic revenue mobilization. How does this capacity building effort help you navigate the current turbulence in a global economy?
Yeah, thank you, Dominic. Good morning, all of you, and thanks to the fund for inviting us to be part of these important discussions. Yeah, maybe before addressing the issue of dealing with crises, I think maybe just a little bit of where we've come from as a country. As you said, we've been able to build a track record in managing our economy and managing our economic affairs, both on the fiscal side, on the real side, but also on the, more especially now that I'm speaking as the governor, on the monetary policy side. And as a Rwandan factory, we are an experience that we came from a failed state. In 1994, after the genocide, the country was almost written off. So we are coming from really zero in terms of human capacity, in terms of data, in terms of systems and legal frameworks. So everything had to start from negative. And we really appreciate the support of our partners, and now we are here with the IMF. IMF has been a key player in building our capacity in economic management. So we had to build our human capacity, our resources in terms of managing the economy. On hands-on skills, we really worked with the fund. We had a lot of trainings of our staff. I can give my own experience. When I joined the Ministry of Finance in 2002 as the Director of Treasury, I had just been working the tax authority. The first time I attended the meeting with the IMF mission in the Ministry of Finance, I was even scared of being part of that meeting. I didn't really understand the technical details there. But then 2005 came here, attended the financial programming course for 8 weeks. And that really formed a foundation of who I am today and what I've been able to contribute to the economic development of our country. So from there, that was 2006 and 2005 and 2006, as a PS, I was now leading the negotiations between the fund and the government of Rwanda. So thanks to the capacity building, I got it from the fund. But beyond that, beyond building the capacity of our staff, we also worked with the fund to build models that now focusing on the central bank, to build models that we are using to understand the nitty-gritties of our economy, the behavior of our economy. Like we started really from the scratch, and we built what we call the FPAS model. This is forecasting and policy analysis system working with the fund. And this, we've been improving on it, and it has helped us to understand better the behavior of our economy. So we've worked on inflation forecasting. We've worked on the balance of payments. We've just moved, recently moved to BM6. So it all has really helped us to understand better the performance of our economy. So when COVID struck, for example, recently, because we already had this built our capacity, we're able to immediately start analyzing data. Even before we had the first case in Rwanda, when it had started in China and started having lockdowns in China, we at the central bank immediately started collecting data on what channels this crisis could affect us as a country. By then, we hoped to end up in China. It wouldn't become a global case. So we normally collect what we call the composite index of economic activities on a monthly basis. But when the crisis hit, we moved it to a weekly basis. And this was enabled because we had built capacity in collecting data, analyzing data, and understanding the trends within the economy. So that immediate action helped us to propose policy measures to the government and working with the government, but also us as a central bank taking policy measures that helped us to weather through the crisis, despite the fact that it was really a challenge, and we had a negative growth in 2020, but immediately, by 2021, we had gone and gotten to recovery, big recovery. 2021, we had economic performance of 10.9% from a negative 3.4% in the year before in 2020. And even today, we see 2022 as we're expecting good growth of around 6.8%. We are hit by inflation like any other country globally. But thanks to this capacity development we've had, we are able to understand the sources of this inflation, what action we need to do as a central bank. We've already taken decisions, of course, to increase our policy rates. But beyond the policy rate, we understand that central bank tools can't be enough to deal with the current challenge of inflation we have as it's mainly supply driven. So we've done economic papers discussing with our colleagues in the fiscal authority to see what we can do, combine monetary policy tools and fiscal policy tools to deal with the challenges of inflation, not just bring it back to its range of around 2 to 8, but also minimizing and mitigating its impact on the population, especially the poor part of our population. So to answer your question, we happy that we build this capacity, but we still have a long way to go. And with the world we are in today, a lot of uncertainties, a lot of changes, new emerging challenges. I think Jita's just talked about the climate issues. Again, we just concluded the negotiations with the IMF last week, and we are the first African country to conclude a program to assess the resilience and sustainability fund. So these are some of the initiatives we appreciate with the fund, but we expect it to remain alert. We expect it to continue building our capacities to deal with the global environment we are in that keeps on changing. We are moving digital, almost everything is moving digital. We are talking of cyber threats. We as regulator of the financial system, we are fully engaged on how to deal with these threats. So I would say we appreciate what we've already achieved with you, but there's a lot still to come, and we count on you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor. Then turning to the Caribbean, Governor Antoine, we recently celebrated together the 20th anniversary of the Regional Technical Assistance Center in the Caribbean. You have been a very important actor in capacity building effort in that region. How do you think that they help the region address the current challenges, such as high debt levels, and the governor from Mongwa was saying also the climate risk that are quite present in your region?
Right, so thank you very much, Dominic, and it's a pleasure to share the stage with first Deputy Managing Director and my colleague, Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda. I want to start by just a quick context. The Caribbean is actually at the front line of the climate crisis. An IMF study in 2018 found that the frequency of natural disaster and weather events in the Caribbean is 7 times greater than any other region in the world. 7 times greater. That same study also found that in terms of damage and losses, the Caribbean experiences 6 times higher losses than any other region, 6 times greater than the global average. Just think about that for a moment. So when I say the Caribbean is on the front line of climate change, the climate crisis, you begin to understand what these numbers mean and the implications for capacity development and financing. So for the Caribbean, pursuing resilience has to be a relentless, lifelong pursuit, given our vulnerability. And so you might ask, well, what is resilience? The way we think about resilience in the Caribbean is the capacity to withstand and absorb shocks, recover, and bounce forward. Not back, forward. Because given the structural issues in the region, it's not enough to simply get back to where we were. We have to constantly think about how we build resilience to reduce our vulnerability, given the numbers I just shared. That is a major pursuit. It means, for example, that we have to have a growth mindset about how we see resilience. That is to say, we constantly have to reframe our problems as opportunities. Not just lament, reframe, and seize. It means that as policymakers and advisors, we have to, even as we deal with immediate crises, such as cost of living, the pandemic, we have to press forward with structural reforms. Those require capacity development. And you might ask, well, what kind of structural reforms? High energy prices. The Caribbean has the highest energy prices in the Western Hemisphere. The highest. Low broadband connectivity. Lack of access to credit. Relatively low human capital development because of brain drain. Those are structural issues. So I want to situate what we're doing with CARTAC and what the fund is doing with us in the context of the needs of the region and the absolute imperative for us to press ahead with structural reforms even as we deal with the immediate crises. And there's a danger in this period that we are so consumed with the fighting for survival that we miss opportunities to press forward with resilience for today and tomorrow. Now you ask me, what are some of the things we should be doing with respect to climate and debt? And one that readily comes to mind is the whole issue of building climate resilience, something that CARTAC, the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance, has done since 2019. We have to build capacity amongst regulators, amongst central banks, amongst ministries of finance, to do 2 things. Risk management, that is to say, to assess risk, both transition risk and physical risk, But we have to do more than that. We also have to do green finance. Because I keep making the point, if all we do is assess risk in the Caribbean, we will simply confirm what we already know to be true, that we are a high-risk region in respect of climate. The question then is, what are we going to do about it? And that requires financial resources for both mitigation and adaptation. And so one of the things that, in terms of capacity development that is needed now is for us to build out a green finance market in the Caribbean. Do you know, in 2020, green bonds issuance was $270 billion globally. Do you know how much of that came to the Caribbean? Not $1. Not $1. Notwithstanding what I just explained in terms of our needs and our exposure. So even as we demand that countries meet their obligations and commitments under the Paris Agreement, we must also take an initiative in the Caribbean to build out a green finance market to tap into regional savings, for example, which is estimated around $50 billion. In fact, it's more than that now. So we have to structure these things. We have to create incentive, create markets, allow financial operators to be able to understand what is possible, financial institution, and be a part of that. Because the fund has always said, and we agree, we have to bring in the private sector to address this challenge. The official sector, by its own, will not suffice. And let's be honest, the bilateral and official are not yet stepping up to the plate sufficiently to address the needs. They're not meeting the moment yet. So that is a clear area of need. And I will give one other quick example, or one other area before I stop. Digitalization. And the first managing director, Geeta, you spoke about that. In the context of COVID, the pandemic, and the fact that digital transformation was accelerated in this period, we have to seize that moment. Many of the countries in the Caribbean are small states. Digital transformation is a great leveler in terms of potential or ability to compete in the global economy. We know that the global economy is becoming more digital. The question is, how are we going to play in that global economy? We have to position the region to do that. That again requires significant capacity development. So things like digital finance, payments. Again, CARTAC is involved in that and others, the fund. Things like not just the enablers, but also safeguards, cybersecurity, data protection. All of those things are enablers and safeguards for the digital economy and require significant capacity development. So in sum, the needs are many. The fund and CARTAC and others are playing a role, but clearly there's significant work ahead of us, as both my colleague panelists have said.
Thanks a lot, Governor. A lot of food for thoughts in intervention so far. We'll take questions in a little while, so if you have questions, you'll see there are 2 microphones in the room, so please line up behind the microphones if you want to ask a question. Just before doing that, I would like to give the chance to the panelists, in a sense, to react to one another. You know, we heard a lot about, in a sense, resilience, what capacity development has done, but also a lot of very big challenges coming up. Climate is one, digitalization is one, shock is one in that context. So in that context, maybe I can ask each of the panelists whether they want either to react to a point that made by one of their colleagues on this stage, or share further thoughts on how we can all do better together to strengthen institution moving forward. Geeta, would you like to have a crack first?
Yeah, no, I think we all agree on the fact that a lot more CD is needed and will be needed. I think we're all completely on the same page there. The points that you brought up on need for climate financing and capacity development on that front and the specific challenges that your region faces, I think is very salient to us. So I don't know if you saw this, but the Global Financial Stability Report has one chapter which is dedicated to how to get green financing to emerging and developing economies. And it starts off with exactly the point that you made, that despite that there are being now hundreds of billions of money for this purpose, very little goes to emerging and developing economies. And so there are ideas there on how to improve this, how to get more money going to the region. But we clearly will need a lot more work to be done on that front. And again, there was the urgency of getting everything done very quickly.
Governor Antoine, do you have
Well, I mean, just to say that I just have to reflect on something the managing director said last week in our curtain raiser, which I thought was very poignant. And she said, you would recall, Gita, that we can survive inflation. We can survive recession. But we cannot survive the climate catastrophe if we fail to act now. That resonated with us in the Caribbean. And I'm sure it resonates with countries large and small, because the climate crisis is not a respecter of size. Although, of course, small size means that we're more vulnerable. And so all I would add is that I just feel a real sense of urgency to join our efforts to work together for this cause. And that would be my appeal, really, to all our partners. Partners who are supporting CARTAC as we renew for our next cycle, as well as others who would wish to come on board in the fight. We need every hand on deck.
Thank you. Governor Wang Wang?
Yeah, thank you, Dominique. I think just what my colleagues have said, today, maybe the animal in the room is climate change is the biggest challenge we're all facing. I would understand the islands in the middle of the ocean, it's even more serious than all of us, but still, we all have the same problem. We've seen weather patterns completely changing. We have issues of floods that destroy lives. So it is a big challenge, and so the need to face it together as a global community is really key. One, in terms of, we are here talking about capacity building, so one in terms of building our capacities as developing nations on how we can structure our finances to deal appropriately with these challenges. But structuring financing without financing coming in doesn't make sense. So I think there's a lot of talk about this issue, but less action. We've had, I think, in the near future, we're going to have COP, is it COP26? I don't remember the numbering, but we'll have all these global meetings coming up every 27, okay, every year, and a lot of commitments, but you don't see it on the ground. You don't see it, and as the more we delay, the more the destruction to people's lives is becoming more serious. So there's need really to work together, the global community, to address these issues. And that's why we appreciate the initiatives through the fund of the Resilience and Sustainability Fund. That's good initiative. And we expect, this has just started, we know some resources are already mobilized, but we expect the big economies, who are the biggest contributors, by the way, to these challenges we're having of climate change, are going to answer to the call to put in more money, and then through this we can support different countries, but even other mechanisms outside there. So we need really to work together to address this. And so there's always this talk that we are not safe until every one of us is safe. Unfortunately, practically doesn't work that way. We saw the experience with the COVID vaccines, so we hope we can do better as a global community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the rooms? I don't see anyone at the moment. Yes, please. If you can come up to the mic. If you can introduce yourself as you ask your question. Thank you so much.
Semitra Bilsi, Professor of Accounting and Governance at Brock University in Canada. You know, the title reminded me, don't give me the fish, but teach me to fish, you know. Don't you think that building resilience go through improving this needy country to develop to kind of upscale their education system so they can build their own capacity? Number two, how can we get the fiscal policy and the monetary policy to go hand in hand. So, to avoid that mismatch that is causing this lack of capacity development. And number three is how, in time of crisis, we renegotiate this social contract where countries, where the public and the private sector, they do what they're good at. Thank you for this great session.
Thank you very much. Maybe we'll take another question and then.
Thank you. Thank you. So the question is directed to Kartak. I am Lennox Andrews from Grenada. There is the view that the very lack of capacity in the islands is a major factor contributing to the very little climate funds coming to the region. So if that's the case, what capacity building training plans does Kartak has for the region?
Thank you. So we have, thank you very much. Let's start with discussion. So we have a couple of very broad questions. One is it, in a sense, maybe if I can rephrase it, is to say, how can we make sure that when we work together on capacity development, it sort of sticks, but it is sustainable. It's capacity that is actually transfers. And then from there on, and then the central banks, the ministries of finance, the statistical institutes that can use that, make it really their own. That may be another question. Another question, which is in a sense, has definitely a non-capacity development element, but has a capacity development element, as the governor from Rwanda was saying, is the interaction between fiscal and monetary policy, and maybe since we are in a capacity development forum, how can we help the institutions make these links? Look at things as we economists like to say in a general equilibrium framework rather than sort of partial equilibrium. And then there was a more specific questions on sort of the development of training capacity in the Caribbean. I don't know if the Governor Rangbowen, you want to start on any of these questions as you see fit.
Yeah, thank you, Dominique. I think on the first question on capacity development, starting even with education systems in our countries is key. Yeah, I think we can't just talk of capacity development of the few that are already there in the workplace, because it's education is a key catalyst to any country's sustained development. And so part of the reforms we are doing is really in education. And so when you have the right crop of young people coming out of the education system, they can make a difference in the sustained development agenda of any country. So I totally agree with the gentleman. And then the importance of coordinating, let me say it, coordinating is because we are expected to be independent of each other, the monetary authority and the fiscal authority, but we are managing the same economy, and there's no way we can pretend to be acting independently and parallel to each other if we are dealing with the same challenges. As I said, today, inflation we are facing today, there's no way in any country you can say you're using just monetary policy tools to address it, because the biggest challenge is, or cause of this is supply shocks. Like in our case, agriculture has a key role in this. So as the government is investing and supporting the development of agriculture, that's key. So I totally agree that there's need to coordinate monetary and fiscal policies, or government policies in general, to deal with the challenges of, today we're talking of inflation, but inflation linked to global crisis, but also in our case, I would say it's also linked to climate change, because that is affecting agriculture. So there but also when you talk of fiscal policy, working with monetary policy, we also need development within the management of these two. The fiscal policy, as developing countries, how have we been able to build our capacities in fiscal policy, going to what we've been working with the different partners, the fund really leading in this is, for example, in Rwanda, we've been able to build our public finance management system, I would say, to global levels. And this was, I mean, the first time we had our budget law or finance act was in 2004, and that was led by the IMF Fiscal Affairs Department. I remember quite well, a gentleman called Duncan Last was the person that we worked with to draft our first budget law, and people might be surprised that we are talking of 2004. I had already given a background of where we are coming from. And we kept on working with the fund to review and update the law. I think the last version was just last year, or if not 2 years ago. But also in terms of the fiscal policy, tax policy, we've really been able to build our tax policy and tax administration, increasing our tax to GDP ratio from 11% 2010 to 16% around today. So all these, so we can't talk of coordinating fiscal policy and monetary policy if you are weak in what you are doing. So we've just again worked with the fund to approve our tax reform policy, our fiscal policy going forward with an aim of increasing our resources by at least 1% of tax in the next 3 years. So I just brought this into context because you need to be developing yourselves in both ways, but then coordination is key. Thank you.
If I may quickly add, I understand the concern about capacity development, but here's the thing. The Caribbean suffers from significant brain drain. We train and they leave. I'll give you a simple example. Do you know that in the New York, New Jersey area, 1 in 25 doctors are trained or were trained in Grenada, a small Caribbean island which happens to be the land of my birth. 1 in 25 doctors in the New York, New Jersey area. But guess what? We have a shortage of doctors because labor, the market, the factor, goes to where it has its highest return. So it is not that we're not trying and training, but we're up against the market. There's a country which I won't name in the Caribbean where 90% of its skills or skilled persons have left. They've gone to either the United States or Canada. What do? We have to keep training. Now, how we try to mitigate some of that is to build systems and put in manuals. But the truth is that when personnel move and they go, you have to train again. So that is a reality in the Caribbean. That's our lived reality. Minister Andrews, you're right. Congratulations. The minister came to office in June, and we will have a chance to sit with you and brief you on what CARTEC is doing. But I want to assure you, Minister, that CARTEC has significant work program for building resilience in a number of areas, including climate, but in the financial sector, in tax administration, and we will want to work with you and your team to give you all the support that we can. So I will simply conclude by saying we have to continue to work together, but it's not as easy as saying just train and keep, because that is what we're up against.
Gita, do you want to have another crack at the fiscal monetary issue?
So there are best practices when it comes to how you do fiscal policy and monetary policy. And central bank independence is absolutely critical. But to be clear, this is about independence when it comes to your operational work. That doesn't mean that you don't have communication and you don't talk with the fiscal authorities, that you don't make sure that your policies are actually kind of aligned to what the goals of the country are. So I think good coordination, if you want to use that word, is basically saying, making sure that your fiscal policy is in line with what monetary policy is trying to achieve, and making sure that you're not creating conflict. So in fact, one of the big messages of this meeting is we're in a world where many countries are trying to bring down inflation, which is very high. At the same time, like you said, energy prices have gone up. There are households and firms who are getting hit hard by it. And as a fiscal authority, you have a desire and you see the need to support the most vulnerable in your country. So the question is, how do you do that without generating an overall inflationary environment, which then goes against how monetary policy works, which is why we've been saying that this fiscal support has to be temporary and targeted. Just one point on how to make capacity stick and the brain drain. I don't know if this helps, but if you look at the evidences, of course, we know that if you have a country whose growth prospects look very good and where you have stability, then we have seen the situation where you have less need for people to leave the country and go. But every country is different, and I'm not making a particular point of one region, but the more opportunities that one has in the country, the more people will be willing to stay.
Thank you. Yes, please. If you can come to the mic and then introduce yourself.
Hi. Hello. My name is Shadan Majali. I work for the U.S. Embassy in Amman. I want to ask, you mentioned, Gita, that in times of inflation, we should move from general subsidies to direct support to the most needy. But what about the middle class? Actually, the middle class is the main driver of the economies, or all economies. So how can we support middle class not to move, a level down and to become like, of the low income class? Thank you.
I think in general, when we're thinking of policy making, one has to keep in mind that there are multiple problems that you're trying to solve. So trying to bring down very high inflation is critical to improve standards of living for everybody, including the middle class, right? And then, of course, you're right that there is the very near term, what looks like the very near term factor for inflation, which is affecting you, which is higher energy and food prices. And you want to try to help that too. But to get the two of them right, I think what it basically says is that there are limits to what you can do in terms of the amount that you can spend. And so yes, if you provide temporary support and it's targeted, then you could do that for maybe more than the absolute bottom in terms of the income scale. And if you can do it using cash transfers, then that is superior to doing it using any kind of a price control mechanism, because we know that that just doesn't do the job. Because what we need is to bring demand down, and if there's no price pass-through, then that doesn't work. So there are different ways of doing it. We've put a lot of it in our flagships about how we actually address these issues. Cash transfers are better than price control mechanisms. Temporary is important, but there's no denying the fact that these are difficult times, so it's not going to be easy to just make everybody as happy as they were 6 months ago.
I'm Ali Alici from ICD, Institute for Capacity Development. So thank you very much for this discussion. I enjoyed it very much. So I have a question for the two governors. So you both mentioned, governors, that the fund has helped the countries, your constituencies a lot on capacity development, but you also mentioned a lot is left to be done. And you mentioned some of the issues on financing. But if we just abstract from financing, just for us, the technical staff of the fund, what do you think would be the avenues for us to kind of improve our delivery of capacity development to you? Or do you think everything is working well, or what are the areas that we can improve? Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Governor, what advice do you
Well, I always start with listening, and it's probably because I learned that from my wife of 25 plus years. Listening is wanting to hear. So I think a little piece of advice which I give is to be better listeners. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Staff, pay attention to that. You do great work, but listen. Don't always come with preconceived ideas. 101, one size doesn't fit all. I would also say that we have to have a realistic assessment of the country capacity to implement recommendations. Because sometimes the truth is, even where sometimes there's lack of political will, to be honest, but there are times when there is political will, but the capacity isn't there to implement as fast as we want. If you don't make a clear assessment of that, an accurate assessment of that, you may conclude that there's no political will, even when there is, and get frustrated that things aren't moving fast enough. But I want to commend the staff of the fund for the work that you do in our countries around the world. It's important work, and certainly as a long-standing finance secretary, I benefited from that personally, like the governor here, and I'm happy to support CARTAC now in this role because I see the value of technical assistance from the fund to our member countries. So hope that helps. We could do a bilateral if you need a little more insights.
Yeah, just what I said. I think there's a lot of improvement that we've seen in the delivery of technical support from the fund. I think Gita earlier talked about the East Africa. So there's been decentralization of capacity building centers from the fund. Way back when I did my training here, I think it was more centralized to the headquarters here. But today we have the East Africa, we have the ATI, the Africa Training Institute. But now also with the COVID has taught us that you can do more online without having to have people travel to centers. So, and we also had in-country trainings from the fund. So I think there's a lot of improvement has been done over the past years. So we can continue. I think what Governor said is really, there are these trainings that are, let me say, generic, very useful, but the in-country trainings that we've had in the past now are focused on the needs of a particular institution or within that country. So I think more of that can be done, really working with, for example, us at the central bank to assess our needs and then work with us. But that we're also doing. We've had really mission. When we say a mission coming to build FPAS with us, it's not just building the model, but it's also training, hands-on job training of our staff. So I would say a lot is being done, and we can work together to continue improving it. Thank you.
Maybe Gita, you hear, and I'm sure we have heard before, and that's fantastic that it's really important to have a bit of modesty on our side, to listen, to be careful, to be closer to the ground. And I think we have tried very much through the regional centers. In the sense that COVID, I don't know if it brought us farther or closer, but in some areas it helps to connect people much more easily, and it is something that certainly we are interested to give. What's your feel about that aspect of our work, of being closer to our dear member countries?
Well, I completely agree that we should be, and I have a feeling that you will tell us when we're not. So
yes,
that is good.
Yes, we will.
we will get the frank feedback, and that's exactly what we would expect and hope to get. So please do to give us that. For me, I think what I also took away from this, obviously, is why it's so critical to combine, make sure our capacity development work is in line with our lending work and our surveillance work, which is what we do at the fund. And as a concrete example, I talked about the surveillance work we do in terms of financing, green financing to the region, but also as was just mentioned, our Resilience and Sustainability Trust. This is us putting money where our mouth is, which is to say that we do see that gap, and we need to be able to contribute to the solution. It's a small part of in terms of the money, it's a small amount, but we need to be able to catalyze much more financing for the region over there. And I think we all have to also keep in mind that for the world as a whole, it's absolutely critical that we have stability and growth in all parts of the world, right? Not just in some pockets, which is why capacity development is so critical to make sure that every region is stable, is growing, is is able to address the issues that it's dealing with internally and externally. And as the IMF, we pledge to continue to help on that front in terms of capacity development. We have plans to do much more, and we really need everybody to step up in the international financial institutions, the MDBs, our donors, everybody to be able to contribute to this, because we need to keep this going. Like we all said at the beginning, there's still a long ways to go.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Thank you very much. Governor, do you want to?
Well, just to join Geeta in saying, I do want to commend the fund on the Resilience Sustainability Trust. I am quite impressed with the speed with which this very important facility has been developed and is now delivering. And certainly that is something to the credit of the fund staff and of course the board. I will simply say, and I'm speaking now from the Caribbean, that CARTAC is just about to begin resource mobilization for its 6th cycle. And given the needs that we've talked about this morning, I'm appealing to all of our contributors to stay on board, and I'm also asking others to come on board. And let me say this, our central bank is a contributor to CARTAC because we believe in the mission and the promise of CARTAC. So when we ask you to support us in capacity development, we are also putting money in. And why would I do that? Because I've benefited from, as financial secretary and now as governor of the central bank, and I recognize the important role that CARTAC plays in our region. So I'm asking everyone to consider joining us as we do our resource mobilization for the 6th cycle, because 6th phase, because there's much, much work to be done. So thanks in advance for that commitment.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. That's indeed financing that we do need. Thank you, Governor, for reminding us of that. Governor Rangwawa, any final words?
Yeah, maybe I just join my colleague to appreciate the role of the partners. We've appreciated the role of the IMF as the vehicle that is delivering this, but without the support of our partners here, that wouldn't be possible. So we appreciate what has been done. But again, as said, the journey is sort of just beginning, because the challenges, the global challenges are just, they're emerging challenges every now and then. So while we're celebrating the milestones we've achieved, but we can't celebrate that we are there. So there's still a long way to go. We need to remain engaged as our partners, as the fund that is helping us to deliver this. And of course, we play our part as the recipients, so as the developing countries that are faced with these challenges. And need to appreciate, of course, the other partners. IMF is a big supporter to us in capacity building, but there are many other partners that we are working with. So it's all that put together that is being able to take us to where we are today. But the challenges are still big. Emerging issues are unending and keeps on coming, and so there's really need to remain focused and engaged, and let's hope beyond the capacity building, the bigger partners will be putting resources on the table to now address the real issues of climate change and the likes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor. Thank you, everybody. I think we have had a very rich discussions, I think, at the end, and we have this sense of his capacity development is really essential. It's a true partnership between our member countries, our partners, and the IMF. It's a journey that is definitely ongoing. Quite a bit has been done, but as Geeta and the governors have mentioned, the issues keep changing, the policy questions that policymakers face keep moving, and therefore the ability and the capacity that is needed in institutions to be able to respond to these challenges keep changing. Before closing this talk, let me just remind you that we'll have further, more specific capacity development talks today and tomorrow. The next around noon will be at Cedar Hall, which is over there, to discuss capacity development efforts on data transparency and financial sector resilience. For those of you that are here in DC this week, please do visit the Capacity Development Experience. You'll find more stories about the work that is being done, the course offerings, the partners that support our technical assistance and training. And for those of you that are online, you can find also that information at imf.org/capdev, C-A-P-D-E-V. Governor Antoine, Governor Wangboa, First Deputy Manager, many, many thanks for the very rich discussions that we have had this morning. We certainly, and I'm sure Gita would support me in that, pledge that we will continue to really be fully on your side, on the policy side, but also very much on the capacity development, and very much for everyone for attending today. Thank you.